Thank you so much. Thank you, Prime Minister. It's an incredibly important and powerful signal that a small island nation, or I prefer to say a large ocean nation, has been leading the COP this year. And the spirit and the soul of Talanoa is, let me tell you, it's just what climate negotiations need. And it's been a fantastic experience to be under your chairmanship. Thank you very much on behalf of the UK government. Now, I have a short time, so I just want to tell one brief story about a journey that is not as well known as it should be in respect of the UK. We are celebrating this week the 10th birthday of the Climate Change Act in the UK, which passed with the biggest majority in Parliament for a century. It passed 10 years ago, and it was the first piece of climate change legislation in the world. And since then, many, many countries have followed down that route. How did it happen? Civil society put together a big ask. Citizens from all across the country, indeed all across the world. Business then came in. The Confederation of British Industry came in with a seminal study with businesses asking for a carbon price. And then it made the job of government much easier. And we got cross-government support for an act that, as I say, passed very, very powerfully and successfully. Now, why does a piece of legislation matter in addition to all the things that are going on out there in society? Well, it set a long-term goal. It preceded the Paris Agreement in saying that we would reduce our emissions by 80% against 1990 levels by 2050. And it wasn't just a nice thing that politicians could say about the future and then do nothing about. It had carbon budgets every 5 years that had to progressively reduce to play our part in tackling climate change. And so we've been on track to reduce those budgets in the UK over the last 10 years. But we get told by our independent climate change committee that when we're off track, we have to do something about it. So we've really begun to see the back and forth of science-based and economic analysis put to the government, who then have to do something about it out there in the real economy. And I'll just give one example of where it's really worked. About 5 years ago, 6 years ago, we had 40% of our power generated by coal. And then, a famous day last year, April the 21st, zero coal in our mix for the first time since 1882. And coal had its place and has its place still around the world, but it is not compatible. It's the biggest single factor in preventing us stabilize the climate globally. And so we legislated, we had emissions reduction targets alongside the carbon budget, alongside carbon pricing, alongside regulation that encouraged renewable energy. And it's not that well known that we are now the biggest producer of offshore wind in the world. And we brought in offshore wind when it was extremely expensive. And it wasn't just about climate, it was about energy security. And in the last 2 years, the price of that offshore wind has halved. It is now cheaper than new gas. It's 40% cheaper than nuclear, and it's a lot cheaper than coal. We now know that coal is a contributor to the air quality that kills over 4 million people a year around the world. And we have shown, I hope, in just one sector, that you can make that transition if you have the support of civil society, you have the support of business, and then you have the will of the political leadership to make that kind of transition. But we have so much more to do in the UK, as we do all over the world. The power sector is the biggest contributor to greenhouse gas emissions, but we have now got to really get serious about transport, about industrial processes, about housing, about agriculture. And that journey has only just begun and has to radically, radically accelerate. So last week, on the 10th anniversary of the Climate Change Act, the government asked our independent climate change committee to look again at our level of ambition and whether it was still fit for purpose in the face of the evidence that we've heard, including from the UN 1.5 degrees report. So we will get that evidence, that independent advice in the next few months, and then leading up to 2019 and 2020 as we review the Paris Agreement, we will find out whether the UK can go that step further as well. And I come back to the original comments from Lucy about a planet that's already warmed by 1 degree, and if we go to 2 degrees or more, that, to give just one example, is a world without coral. So the idea that we keep below 2 degrees and 2 degrees is okay, I think has been blown out of the water by that fantastic UN report. And we all now need to look at that whole of economy, whole of society transformation, that's good for health, good for jobs, good for the environment, good for the economy. It all adds up, and there's really no reason not to go forward. Thank you.